And so a lot of people are talking about this as being really a big leap forward in LLMs and how, in many regards, it's actually better than ChatGPT or any of the other LLMs. But I'm going to share some of my own experiences with it, where I can see some things which I was surprised, a little disappointed in some regards, actually. What you should expect is that you get a better quality of output. Hello and welcome to the Healthtech Marketing Show. I'm your host, Adam Turinas. Welcome to the show. If this is your first time listening, I want to thank you for joining us. And you can subscribe to this show on any of your favorite podcast apps. And we're also on YouTube as well. I want to give a big thank you to our sponsors, the people at HIMS, who've been a long-time supporter of what we do, and also the wonderful people at Healthcare Now Radio. Thank you for all your support and all that you do for us. Really appreciate it. So I want to talk about something which you've probably seen all over LinkedIn, certainly been in the media. It's kind of a big deal, and that's Google's announcement in the last few weeks of Gemini 3 and Nano Banana. It is kind of interesting. I want to get beyond the hype cycle. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the way that the way that Google is talking about Gemini 3. So break that down for you so you can understand what the strategic themes are and what to expect out of Gemini. And then I'm going to share what I've been doing myself with it, which is I've been doing some experimentation with it, and in particular, benchmarking it against ChatGPT and some of the other applications out there. And I'm going to kind of conclude for you what I think the pros and cons are of Gemini and how it fits in compared to the other LLMs. Okay, so let's talk about the way that what Google is saying about it. So Gemini 3 is Google's newest multimodal AI system. And multimodal basically means it handles text, images, data, and reasoning. So in that sense, that's a really cool new functionality. It's very, very important. And compared to earlier versions, it's much better at reasoning. It has much stronger world knowledge, and it has huge context awareness. And so a lot of people are talking about this as being really a big leap forward in LLMs and how, in many regards, it's actually better than ChatGPT or any of the other LLMs. But I'm going to share some of my own experiences with it, where I can see some things which I was surprised, a little disappointed in some regards, actually. So, what you should expect is that you get a better quality of output. So rather than say, a high school essay, you get a college level essay. Maybe that's one way of thinking about it. And so it really means, what you should expect as a health tech marketer is that it understands context better. So it understands the difference between clinical workflow and business workflow, for example, between it understands what prior auth means. It understands what CMS is. And, as we know, right, context is everything in healthcare. And so I guess it's better. I hadn't really benchmarked compared to what it was before. But I think, as you'll see later, I don't think it's, in terms of expertise on healthcare, it's everything that they say it's cracked up to be. One of the really cool things that they've announced is Nano Banana. And so while it's got a pretty silly name, it is a pretty cool tool. And so what Nano Banana Pro is their image generator. And paired with Gemini 3, it's really very powerful. And that is actually pretty impressive. I've certainly found in the past that using the image generators for things like ChatGPT, they really don't work very well. You have to kind of use things like Midjourney. Maybe it's just the way I've been writing the prompts, but I've just been pretty disappointed with it. Nano Banana Pro does it really well. And that's pretty impressive. So what you can expect to be able to do with Nano Banana Pro is create diagrams, infographics, user flow charts, mock-ups, visual explainers, And it also creates legible text, which, as I understand, is actually something that a lot of the LLMs have struggled with. And it can do it in multiple languages. So you actually can do multilingual visuals, which is, I don't know if it's that important in healthcare, but, maybe if you have a Hispanic audience as well as an English speaking audience, that's important. But, that's pretty cool, I guess. According to Google, it's shockingly accurate. And when you pair Nano Banana with Gemini 3's reasoning engine, you get a creative system that can produce a full explanation and the visuals to go with it. And it seems to actually push that quite actively when you use it just in a simple sort of text way that you might use ChatGPT. I think that's a pretty cool thing. The ability to create visuals easily is compelling. So let me kind of break down some of the 3 key things that they talk about. And those 3 things are multimodal workflows, how Google integrates it with all the other applications. And the third thing is what it means to you as a creative producer. So if somebody who's actually creating creative, what it actually means. And then there's I'll talk a little bit about afterwards about what the impact, what that means in terms of search and potentially what it means in terms of paid search and Google as an advertising platform. So let's just talk a bit first about, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on this one, is multimodal workflows, because that's kind of the biggest deal here in my view. So you can generate your copy, your visual diagrams, your campaign structure all in one shot. And it's not just, you don't actually have to change LLMs to do it. Ostensibly, you can do all of this with Gemini. You're going to have to kind of play it out to see whether it lives up to the promise. I'm still a little bit on the fence, frankly, as to whether or not it can do it, but the way they're certainly designing it that way. So, that means that you can get faster creative briefs, faster drafts, smarter edits, and you also can create a more consistent voice. So it actually makes it easier. Gemini 3 apparently makes it easier to load up your brand voice and have that reflected. So that's something which, I found is a bit hit or miss with the other LLMs. And so, if you're building, an infographic, like say for care pathways, Nano can create your first draft of that in seconds if you give it a really good text prompt. Your designers can spend time refining what the output of Nano Banana Pro rather than starting from scratch. So that's pretty cool. I thought, ostensibly it also is good for thought leadership. It's good for synthesizing complex material and structure. So, you should be able to build better white papers faster and better LinkedIn content. As I'll come on to later, I'm not so sure it is that great at it, actually. And I'll tell you a bit about where I benchmarked it. So the second big thing about it is Google is integrating this with its own applications. So that means it's much easier to integrate it with Gmail, with Google Docs, with Google Sheets, with Chrome, with Android. And, I haven't quite thought through all the possibilities there, but I've certainly find it frustrating with the other LLMs that you have to kind of copy and upload other documents unless you've got it well integrated with some of your applications. But if Google is actually doing this in a much more seamless way than the other LLMs, it does give them an advantage. So if you're an organization that uses a lot of the Google applications, Gemini 3 could be actually a much better LLM for you to use because, you can pull data out of your Google Sheets, you can pull communication out of your Gmail, you can pull reports out of your Google Docs, out of your Google Drive rather, and it can process all of that quickly and intelligently. And anyway, that's the promise. So the thing it says it's better at, and some of the benchmarks seem to suggest is that it's faster, which means that you can produce work faster. I don't really know, if it is. I found it to be, when I was doing my benchmark test, I didn't find it to be sort of like so dramatically faster that I would stop using any of the other LLMs. But maybe if you're doing really complex coding or things like that, you get an advantage there. Certainly they're sort of the benchmarks that they're reporting seem to indicate that. I think the most interesting thing is actually what's behind this, and that's Google's strategy here. So, Google's cash cow is Google Ads, right? That is, Google makes money in lots of different ways, but still its biggest revenue generator is what it makes from advertising. And as consumers and B2B customers shift their searching behavior away from searching on Google to using LLMs, and we've talked about this, ad nauseum, right? So you just need to check out several of the past episodes. We've gone into that in depth. As people shift towards using the LLMs for doing research, it's a big problem for Google because it means they've got fewer eyeballs to monetize, and it means that you're less, as an advertiser, you're less likely to see the value of Google Ads. And what they seem to have been doing, I don't think they'll admit to it, but it certainly looks like it to me, is that they've just been increasing the number of sponsored links that you get in search results as a way to counter that. But that's not sustainable. So they do have they've got a serious strategic issue, and they've fully embraced it. They're not in denial about it. And so I think I'm sure you've seen AI overviews, right? Whenever for most searches these days on Google, you get an AI overviews. That actually is powered, as I understand, it's powered by Gemini. And so with Gemini 3 powering it, it means that the output of it is going to be much richer. And there's some really interesting stuff that's sort of between the lines here. So I was recently listening to one of my favorite podcasts, which is This Old Marketing Show. I'm sure many of you will know it. It's been around for a long time. They're so smart, those guys. And they went quite deep into something that Google is hinting at, and some stuff, in my view, is really interesting. And I think the notion here is that in AI overviews, Google is going to move from just having text-based results to having stuff which are much more interactive and much more visually engaging. I mean, they've published a white paper on this that, surprise, surprise, that AI generated visuals are much more satisfying to people searching than text. I mean, that's not surprising. The old adage, picture's worth 1,000 words. And so, the idea here is that rather than just getting, an essay that responds to your prompt, you might get like a little microsite which has got visuals. It maybe eventually even has little videos, and some of that may be pulling from other sources. But what these guys on This Old Marketing Show were hinting at is that the likelihood is essentially it creates original content on the fly, and that's certainly because it's multimodal and because it's able to process data a lot faster. That actually technically should be possible. And that gets really interesting because, as I've talked about this a lot, there's a decline in SEO driven traffic, right? People are not clicking through from Google to go to your websites or your competitors' websites. They're staying on Google because they're getting the answers on AI overviews. And if they make the experience much more engaging, that is just going to get worse. So for us, it means less traffic. It means less opportunity to get people to come to our website. And I think, that we've got to think about that as marketers, because what it means is that we start to think of Google rather than a place where you want to get, to get the top links, either through paying for it or through SEO, to thinking about Google the way that you think about traditional media companies. In that, people don't tend to click through from TV commercials. I know, they're much more interactive with direct TV and QR codes and things like that. And so that's all great, but it's not a huge part of advertising revenue. And so effectively, Google then becomes kind of the notion of, it's a term I heard very early on in my digital days back in the 90s, called the notion of a contextual envelope. So, you go to Google, let's say you go to Google to research patient engagement or patient behavior or something like that. If you're one of the people, you're a CMO of a healthcare system. So as a marketer, right now you'd be buying AdWords related to patient engagement, patient behavior, maybe adherence to a medical program or to a regimen of some kind. And so that when the buyer is using Google to get the answer to the questions, they are going to hopefully click on a text ad, which will link them back to your website. So in the not too distant future, AI overviews will evolve to presenting a much more engaging article. Maybe it's a buyer's guide created on the fly. Maybe it's a video. Maybe it's an infographic. Maybe it processes a lot of different research from different sources to give the buyer the answers to all of their questions right there within Google. And so you, as a marketer, are going to need to place ads there, and just a simple text link, with whatever it is, like 20 words or however many words you're allowed these days with Google Ads, isn't going to cut it. You're going to have to produce commercials. You're going to have to do ads with offers. And so I think it's quite interesting in terms of what it means to us as advertisers. And in terms of the timing of when this is going to happen, it's not clear, but it could be we start to see this within the next year. I don't think that's out of the question. And sort of certainly the way that Google's hinting about it would suggest that's possible. And so as marketers, I'd suggest you really start to think about this. So you got to think about AEO, GEO, AIO, whatever initials you use for this, in terms of getting your content cited in the answer engines. But you also are going to have to think about what Google is doing with AI overviews and the type of advertising that you're going to need to develop to get people at the right time. And so how do you create ads that are tailored to different prompts? It's not just about sticking a single banner ad up. I mean, maybe it is, or a single video ad up. You're going to have to create stuff which is tailored to the prompt to do it, to really take advantage of what the medium is. Okay, let's move on to a different topic. And this is my own personal benchmarking of Gemini 3. And so you might have heard, if you listen to one of our past episodes, 100th episode, that we've developed an AI system, an application, if you like, called the HLP BrAIn. And this is not publicly available. We're just using it internally. But, we're toying with the idea of making it available to clients in the new year once we've got it sort of polished up a little bit. But the whole idea behind it is to AI enable sort of deep healthcare marketing expertise, and particularly expertise and knowledge of the buyers. And so basically the way we've done it is we've created this sort of way of storing data for AI called vector stores, where you're essentially embedding chunks of data that makes it easier for the GPTs, the LLMs, to process that data. And what we've been doing consistently over the last couple of months, and we do this on a weekly basis, is to benchmark how the BrAIn is performing versus ChatGPT. We've just done it against ChatGPT to start with. We'll probably expand it. And to do that, we've created a set of 3 different tasks. So one is creating a persona narrative about a chief marketing officer, sort of a day in the life of a chief marketing officer. Second one is creating a blog post for a CIO. I think it's about interoperability. And then the third one is a set of personalized emails for a patient engagement solution targeting a chief nursing officer. And these are really detailed written prompts. So they're the sort types of prompts that you would use if you're really serious about using the LLMs to create sort of thoughtful content that leverages the depth of knowledge of the LLMs. And so what we do is, we create the content using the LLM, so using ChatGPT, and then we use it using the BrAIn. And then I did it this time using Gemini. And the interesting thing was that ChatGPT is a good script writer. It's a good, writes well. If you didn't have a lot of knowledge of the industry, you'd look at it and say, well, this is really smart. Gemini didn't wrote elegantly. It's a really kind of really well written what was out, but the output, but it was really not very expert. The BrAIn produces significantly more expert content. And I'll give you sort of the numbers on it. And so when we have about 10 different criteria that we look at, so the BrAIn was getting sort of 8 to 10 out of 10 on a variety of experts attributes, particularly on this sort of level of expertise and reflecting nuance about the persona, sort of use of of language that's specific to healthcare. ChatGPT was getting sort of 7s, 6s, 7s, and 8s, so about 30 to 40% less expert. Gemini is getting between 4 and 6. And so in our view, the BrAIn, as we're currently benchmarking it, is already 30 to 40% more expert in producing content for our market than ChatGPT. And it's at least 2x more expert than Gemini. And you can read, and when you read the output, you can see it specifically. The marketing is saying that in terms of context, Gemini is going to outperform everything. In our view, from a healthcare perspective, it's not that great, and certainly against our benchmarks. Then the other thing I did is a second test, which is I thought, hey, you know what? It'd be great to get I'm going to use the LLMs to help me create the podcast script. And I actually got it right here. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see my eyes go down, and I'm referring to the script quite frequently. So I wrote a detailed prompt, which is, I'm writing a podcast about Gemini 3. I want you to start by doing the research on what Gemini 3 is about, what the pros and cons are about it, what it means for health tech marketers, etc. Sort of, you can get a sense of what that was. It was, I don't know, about a 200-word long prompt. And then it said, the second part of the prompt was create an outline for the podcast. And then the third part of the prompt was then write a detailed script. And then there was a fourth part component, which is the script turned out to be an hour-long script, which is, don't think anybody wants to listen to me blather on about this for an hour. So I said, reduce it down to 15 to 20 minutes. And I did it with Gemini 3. I did it with ChatGPT. I did it with Claude. And I did it with Perplexity. It was sort of interesting doing this because actually my go-to on these types of things is actually Claude. And I was surprised what I found out. So the first one was ChatGPT actually came out as the best. It was the best script writer and the most balanced all-round performer. So I was genuinely surprised about that. I was fully expecting that Claude would do the best of that. And I felt the output and certainly the benchmark. I then also ran it back through all of the LLMs. I got them to basically all four of them to benchmark the outputs of all four of them to sort of see what happened. And I actually got fairly consistent results. So they all kind of benchmarked what their pros and cons are fairly objectively. And so it actually created a fairly consistent benchmark across all four of the LLMs. So again, ChatGPT sounds like a real person in many regards, and with flows and transitions and humor. I still think it's a bit corny. I never feel comfortable reading it verbatim, but it's pretty good and the flow's pretty good. And as I said, it surprised me because Claude's always been my go-to for it. I'll come on to Claude in a minute. Gemini, great structure. It actually seems to be its strength is actually in structuring information. It was very weak on healthcare depth, as I mentioned before. So it shines on structure, writes really great outlines. There's a sort of clean segmentation of the information. The tone is professional, maybe a little corporate, but that's also probably because I haven't used Gemini 3 or Gemini before much, so it doesn't know my voice. Whereas, a ChatGPT and Claude, I've been using it for a while, so it does know my voice. So, actually Gemini produced the best outline quality. Interestingly, again, going back to the versus the BrAIn benchmark, this surprised me is that there's a marketing effectiveness criteria that we benchmark ChatGPT against the BrAIn. And that's the one where the BrAIn does well, a little bit better, but not dramatically better. Gemini 3 actually got a 3 out of 10, and then the BrAIn and ChatGPT do significantly higher. And I think the reason is because Gemini writes like it's talking to a general audience, not an enterprise buyer. And if you make it really clear, and I made it really clear in the prompts, this is who I want you to write it for, and it still didn't get it. So I don't think for expert stuff that it's that great. Claude, best professional tone and strategic thinking. So Claude writes like a McKinsey consultant, and the output is polished, it's articulate, and it's the most kind of executive briefing style. So again, a little bit corporate, not quite something that makes a particularly engaging podcast, which surprised me. Perplexity, if you've used Perplexity, you probably won't be surprised about it. It's fantastic for doing research, and it just outperforms all the other ones. But it writes crappy writer. I mean, the script that comes out of it is just awful. And when it benchmarks itself, it says it's not its thing. So, phenomenal for research, terrible for storytelling. So I thought this was interesting. And again, I've got the notes in front of me, actually, in terms of just going back to the first benchmark. The BrAIn got a sort of score of 9.3 out of 10 for the 3 tasks that I told you about earlier, the sort of writing content. ChatGPT got 6.1, so not bad, but not great. Gemini got 4.8. And so creating an expert source of content sort of designed for the LLMs and really carefully curating it. You got to fill it with quality, not just quantity. The BrAIn is actually outperforming ChatGPT by 53% and Gemini by 94%, which I just think is kind of staggering. Anyway, so let me put it all together for you. ChatGPT seems to be the best storyteller. Gemini is best for structure. Perplexity is the best researcher. Claude has the best strategic tone. And, based on our benchmarks, the BrAIn seems to be so far the best at healthcare specific executive or sort of B2B content. I want to leave you with 5 key takeaways. So number 1, Gemini seems to be really good for structure and an organization. The second thing is the combination of multimodal power plus Nano Banana for visuals and VO3 too, by the way, for video, means that you have the potential to create really great dynamic content or sort of interactive, engaging content much faster by combining the Google tools. And so we're certainly going to be playing around with that because that is, that's really cool for creative businesses like ours. I think, based on my own research, my own benchmarking, again, it was, a limited test, but still, using a pretty robust testing methodology. It seems to be weak on healthcare depth and understanding the B2B healthcare persona. And I wouldn't use it for executive level thought leadership. I think the output of it is just too shallow. I'd still use Claude or ChatGPT, but with a ton of different information, like, accessing what we have in the BrAIn to make sure that what comes out of it is expert. The last thing is the strategic shift. And I think this is the most interesting thing, which is it is signaling a major change in the way that Google is going to work as an advertising platform. So I think that's something that we all need to be thinking about. So, okay, I'm going to bring it to a close now. I hope you found this useful. And if you did, please share it with your friends and colleagues. It would mean a lot to me if you would do that. It would also mean a lot to me also if you give it a thumbs up on YouTube or a positive rating on whatever your favorite podcast application. So with that, I want to bid you farewell and say thank you for listening.